All right, today we're going to dig into a media segment that puts forward a really bold idea about the opposition to immigration enforcement. It calls the whole thing orchestrated chaos. So let's get into what that actually means, according to them. Orchestrated chaos. That phrase right there, that's the whole ball game for the source material we're looking at. The main idea is that all the protests, the political pushback, the media stories, none of it is just happening randomly. Nope. The argument is that it's all part of a coordinated campaign. We're going to unpack exactly what they mean by that.
To really get a handle on this perspective, we're going to walk through it in 5 parts. First, the main chaos argument. Then we'll look at the sanctuary city conflict, how the opposition is profiled, the escalating language being used, and finally, what the source says should be done, a call to stand firm.
Okay, let's kick things off with the chaos argument itself. This is the foundation of everything else. The central claim here is that what you're seeing isn't some organic grassroots movement. Instead, it's a deliberate effort by a group they've labeled the Open Borders Mafia. So, according to the source, if you feel like public opinion is shifting on this issue, they're saying that's not by accident. The argument is that biased media coverage, which focuses on really tragic incidents, is being used to, manipulate how people feel. But the bottom line for them is that this shouldn't change a thing, because at the end of the day, the law is the law.
And that idea leads us right into our next big topic, the sanctuary city conflict. The source really zeroes in on this as a perfect example of the friction, that tug of war between local police and federal authorities.
To really drive this point home, the source zooms in on one specific case, a man named German Inga, an Ecuadorian national who was accused in a fatal DUI crash. This incident is presented as a direct and tragic consequence of so-called sanctuary policies.
Okay, so here's how the source lays out the timeline. First, the suspect gets arrested by the local county. Simple enough. Then ICE files what's called a detainer. That's basically a formal request to hold him for them. But according to the source, the county just ignores that request and the suspect is let go.
And this is where you really see the core of the disagreement, right? On one side, you have the argument that making a local jail hold someone for ICE is forcing them to do the federal government's job. But the other side, the view from our source, is that it's not about enforcement, it's just cooperation. Simply giving a heads up to a federal agency before you release someone they're interested in.
So here's how the source connects all these dots. It basically creates a kind of formula for what it calls lawlessness. And in their view, it's a direct result of 3 things mixed together: sanctuary city policies, what it labels open borders propaganda, and finally, boots-on-the-ground activism.
All right, so from policies, we're now shifting our focus to the people involved. This brings us to Section 3, profiling the opposition. This is all about how the source describes the protesters and the activists themselves. And to make its case, the source uses this really powerful quote from an ICE special agent. The claim here is that when activists use noisemakers, whistles, bullhorns, to warn people that ICE is in the area, they're not just protesting, they're actually helping violent defenders and even convicted sex predators get away.
The source then points to a few specific incidents to illustrate what they mean. It claims that protesters, and these are their words, terrorized hotel guests in New York, that they tried to smash through glass doors at another hotel in Minnesota, and in another case, they physically blocked agents from arresting a convicted sex offender.
And to really hammer home this idea of connecting protesters to criminality, the source singles out one person, claiming one of the arrested rioters had a long and violent rap sheet that even included beating a pregnant woman. Okay, so it's not just about what people are doing, according to the source. It's also about what they're saying. And that brings us to Section 4, which is all about what the source sees as escalating rhetoric.
The source then fires off a series of quotes it considers pretty extreme and normalized. First up is this one, from Philadelphia's DA, Larry Krasner, who is quoted calling federal agents a small bunch of wannabe Nazis.
And that same quote keeps going, with language the source frames as a direct threat. It promises to hunt down agents in the same way Nazis were hunted, saying, quote, "We will find your identities. We will find you." Next up, the source highlights a Democratic candidate who is running for Attorney General in Ohio. He's quoted as saying, "I am going to kill Donald Trump." Now, he later explained he meant he was going to secure a criminal conviction against him in court, but the source focuses on the phrasing itself.
And the whole sequence wraps up with this one, aimed at White House advisor Stephen Miller. The quote makes a direct comparison to Nazi war criminals, with the speaker saying they want Miller to be the #1 in the Nuremberg trials when this is done.
So after building this whole argument against the opposition, what's the takeaway? What's the proposed solution? Well, that's our final section, the call to stand firm.
Yeah, the final word here is pretty blunt. The source argues that backing down to who they call vile radicals is completely out of the question. The claim is that nothing short of totally open borders would ever satisfy them anyway. So what's the game plan then? Well, the source lays out a really clear 3-step strategy for the administration to follow. 1. Keep the focus on the economy. 2. Keep working to secure a safer future for Americans. And 3. Simply enforce the immigration laws exactly as they are written.
And this all builds to one last, pretty stark prediction from the source. The conclusion is that the opposition, which they say is just consumed by hatred, will eventually collapse on itself. That it will, quote, rot from the inside out.
And that really leaves us with the central question at the heart of all this, doesn't it? When political divisions get this intense, how do we define the line between legitimate dissent and actual chaos? And maybe even more importantly, who gets to draw that line? Definitely something to think about.